Good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are. I am Jill Saperstein, National Vice President. Welcome to the 25th One Book Hadassah. Started in 2020 during the COVID pandemic, One Book, One Hadassah was a way for Hadassah to connect with our members virtually. Now a staple of Hadassah programming, One Book, One Hadassah has been expanded to live in-person events. Welcome to the second hybrid One Book, One Hadassah. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce Talia Carner, a proud seventh-generation Sabra. She is the author of several psychological suspense novels, including Puppet Chair, China Doll, and Jerusalem Maiden, amongst others. Talia was formerly the publisher of Savvy Woman magazine and a consultant to Fortune 500 companies. As a board member of Hadassah Brandeis Institute and an honorary board member of several anti-domestic violence, child abuse intervention, and anti-sex trafficking organizations, Talia is a committed supporter of global human rights. Talia is married to Ron Carner, former president of Maccabi USA. Talia and Ron have 4 grown children. Talia will be interviewed today by Lisa Hostein, executive editor of Hadassah magazine. Lisa joined the magazine in late 2015, becoming the first women executive editor in the 100-year-plus history of the magazine. Before joining Hadassah magazine, Lisa was the editor-in-chief of JTA, the global news agency, for almost 15 years, and executive editor of Philadelphia's Jewish Press Association for 8. Lisa has received numerous journalism awards over the years, including the Award for Distinguished Service to Jewish Journalism by the American Jewish Press Association. Under Lisa's leadership, Hadassah magazine has received almost 40 Rock Hour Awards for excellence in Jewish journalism. Lisa and her husband live in a suburb of Philadelphia. Lisa and Talia are with us today to chat about Talia's newest novel, The Boy with the Star Tattoo. Lisa, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Jill. As Jill mentioned, this is chapter 25 of One Book, One Hadassah. And I am so excited that we are presenting the second live event at a Hadassah National Conference. I mean, after all, what better audience to be doing this with? And if I had any doubt, the fact that so many of you have come up to me over the last couple of days to tell me how meaningful these programs are and how much you love the magazine, which is nice too. It affirms for us that the work that we put into these programs does a service for Hadassah, and we are just so delighted. So I am so delighted to be here. And I also want to give a shout out to our live stream audience, because there's several hundred of you on with us, I know, in the evening, perhaps in the East Coast and across the country, and you too are a loyal audience. And I suggest and bet that there are some newcomers to the program on live stream, probably huge fans of Talia Carner. And maybe you'll see what's going on at Hadassah. And if you'd been at this conference, you'd really see what's going on at Hadassah. And you'll become members and supporters of the organization. So I am just so delighted. As most of you know, One Book, One Hadassah was launched exactly 4 years ago this summer as an opportunity for all of us book lovers to get on the same page at the same time. And most importantly, to elevate the voices of female authors with Jewish-themed books. And I can't tell you how important that particularly is these days in these times. So, of course, we have the perfect match for you today, with Talia Carner, both the person and the book, as we've mentioned. Should we say it again? The Boy with the Star Tattoo, because the themes are just so pertinent to our Hadassah family. So I just want to let you know we're going to be taking questions only from in person. Sorry, live streamers today. You can see some information in the chat, how to buy the book, how to access some resources, but the questions are just going to come live. You have index cards on your tables and pens, so please write your questions as they come to mind. And at about 20 minutes or so, some people are going to come around and collect them, and we will offer those questions to Talia. So, welcome, Talia.
Thank you.
We're so excited that you're here.
And I must say myself that I read Hadassah magazine from cover to cover for years. So you are really
I didn't pay her to say that. So, such a compelling and fascinating story that you've interwoven in this book. Complex, and we're going to really, dig deep into it. But it's just such an important Zionist look at Zionist history and Jewish history interwoven. And these days, when Zionist writers, sometimes they are Zionists, sometimes they're not, Jewish writers are being targeted and in some cases canceled. You not only wrote a book, that may be coincidental that it came out because I'm sure you started it years ago, but you wrote a book that really touched on important Jewish and Zionist themes, but you're also speaking out in a very, very important way against what's going on in the publishing world. And I have to say that from my perspective, and we go through a lot of books that come into our office every day, this is probably the most Zionist book that I've seen in the past year, except maybe with the exception of Francine Klagsburn's biography of Henrietta Zold. I mean, you can't get much more Zionist than that, right? But this really is way up there. So I want to start by asking you, Talia, to give us a synopsis of this complex story. And without giving away spoilers, because I'm sure a lot of you have read the book, and I'm sure some of you have yet to and will be anxious to buy it as soon as we're done. So give us that kind of brief synopsis with no spoilers, please.
Oh, I never share spoilers.
Oh, good.
The story is about a young woman, an Israeli, being recruited to work in Cherbourg, France, with the Israeli Navy that is stationed there. This is the late 1960s. When she accepts the job, her boss doesn't know that she actually means to find out more about his past. He had been brought by Youth Aliyah had been found in a quaint village in France. And while she's doing whatever needs to be done on this job that she's taken, she actually follows a breadcrumb trail throughout France to uncover his story.
That was really perfect synopsis there, really, without giving away any spoilers. So, Youth Aliyah, obviously a huge subject for Hadassah, which is part of the reason why you're here and so pertinent to this audience. Why your fascination with Youth Aliyah? How did that come about? What inspired this story?
Growing up in Israel, I always knew about Youth Aliyah. There is a street, Aliyat HaNoar. There were stamps made for Aliyat HaNoar. So it was not unknown to me. But the story that touched me was my friend David's family. David married my BFF, and I was introduced to the family over 50 years ago. The story was that his father, Herman, came out of a concentration camp, traveling through Europe, trying to get to a port to get a ship, any port, any ship that would take him anywhere. And one night he slept in a monastery. And in the morning, as he was about to leave, a monk says to him, "There's a Jewish kid here, there's somebody left. Would you take him?" He said, okay. He took the boy, whom he figured out was about 6.5 based upon the teeth, found a boat to Bolivia that at that time opened its gates to Jews, met on a ship, he met his future wife. They got married, adopted this boy, and a year later had my friend David. Several years later, they moved to Israel, where eventually I met them. And from the moment I heard about David's brother, adopted, about 7.5 years older than him, that nobody knew anything about him, the name, where it came from. I said, how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, 6 million Jews evaporated in incinerators. What happened to the children that they left with families, with farms, monasteries, maybe for 2-3 months, thinking they're coming back? And obviously they didn't. What happened to those children? And how they were found? And that we'll get to, if you want to ask another question, I'll come into my research about it.
Yes.
But that's the story that touched me decades ago.
Yeah. So it's so interesting because, again, Youth Aliyah is so important to our Hadassah world. And I know that at least when I think about Youth Aliyah, I think about Henrietta Zold, who was, the leader and founder, although she was not the only one who had the idea. There was somebody who had the idea before her, but she really took the lead. And we think about how they arrived in Israel. We know about the villages that continue to serve Jews from around the world and at-risk children. I don't know if our 2 Youth Aliyah representatives are here. I had the opportunity to be with them last night. They are fabulous. Are you here? No, they didn't want to do this. But what none of you know is that they actually did a TikTok with Montana Tucker after everybody else had kind of thinned out and gone away. So fabulous. These 2 are fabulous if you have an opportunity to meet them. But that's what we know about Youth Aliyah. What I've never thought about is what you're mentioning. Where were they found? Who were they? Where did they come from? Who took care of them? So that focus is really interesting. That's what you really focus on. So
Yeah.
tell us about that research.
So
and
my
focus.
next question was, how were those children actually found? Did an Israeli agent? Oh, I must say that I read the memoir of the father of a friend of mine. I knew the father, but by the time I had the questions, he had passed away. In his memoir, there's one paragraph: I went to Marseille, I picked up Jewish orphans. So I said, wait a minute. How did they do that? Did an agent actually knock on the door of every farmhouse and asked, do you by any chance have a Jewish kid here? Let me take her across the Mediterranean to a country whose language she doesn't speak. And the people who've raised her for 3, 4, 5 years say to the stranger at the door, sure. How did it happen? I actually read a book about Youth Aliyah written by a professor. By the time I found her, she was teaching in Australia. She couldn't answer this question. I interviewed so many people from the Yad Vashem and the Shoah Museum in Paris, because my story is focused specifically in France, but it was true everywhere. They could not answer the question. I finally found still one agent who was still alive, a woman, on her deathbed, literally. It took weeks for her son to call me one day and say, okay, she can now talk to you. Just ask her the question. And I did. I finally asked, and she answered one word: money. And for sure. Henrietta Sold was so fantastic in fundraising. Because the one thing I also found from the memoir that I read, not just from my friend, but through various other stories, was how much those agents were flushed with money. And where did they get this money from? They came from very poor Israel. Israel at that time had a population of 600 to 650,000 Jews, almost starving. Where does this money come from? And I realized, but the way they did it, then I continued to follow this particular thread. They did it in a much more elegant way. They would say, may I compensate you for the months and years that you have spent raising this child? And post-World War II, Europe, France specifically in this case, were destitute. So money was very much appreciated, and that helped tremendously. But that also doesn't mean that all those children were loved and wanted. For many, they'd become a burden. and as someone who's written several books about what happens to children when they are not protected properly, there had been tremendous amount of abuse as well. The stories are as varied as the number of children, basically. But back to the subject of how the agents found those children, they sometimes villagers knew that there's a Jewish child here in somewhere around here, or the people who housed them wanted to give them to the state orphanages past the war because they were no longer in mortal danger. They were on their own in many ways, but the Holocaust, the killing them, was no longer this immediate threat, so they did not want to continue to take care of them. So they were, again, as the cases were as varied as the number of children and their ages. Babies never knew their names or were not attached to their birth families. Teenagers have grown during those years and disappeared into miasma of the world, post-World War II Europe.
You know, you actually have two quotes in the book related to what you're talking about that I want to read because I think that really touches on the subject. So when Uzi Yarden, who's one of the characters in the book, he arrives in Marseille, he's told by one Youth Aliyah operative in the country, "We are grateful for the heroism of local people who sheltered and saved our children, often risking their own families' lives. But it's time. We fear for our children's Jewish souls." And Uzi's main contact, Miriam, tells him that children are the new post-war commodity in Europe.
Oh.
So these seem to really reflect two different perspectives on this issue of the orphan children, and not just Jewish, right? It also affected non-Jewish children of post-World War II Europe. So tell us about the different approaches of nations and kind of replenishing their population,
Yeah,
and how Youth Aliyah fit into that.
This is a very important new idea that I realized, that during the war, every single country lost millions of people, and they wanted to replenish their populations. Of course, you can start from scratch, but when there are so many children, they became, those unclaimed children became the new commodity. So Poland, that had killed 3 million Jews, that after World War I, already millions of Jews had left and fled, for example, to France. Now Poland claimed the children of the refugees from Poland as their nationalities. The idea was the children were tabula rasa. No matter whichever way you are going, whoever's going to get them is going to raise them according to that national identity. Into that mix come the Zionists, but even the Zionists, meaning Youth Aliyah, because Henrietta Sold believed in the future of the Jews in the land of our ancestors. But not all the Jewish organizations were in support of it. And again, specifically, my book is set in France. The Jewish organizations post-World War II felt that the Fourth Republic is going to be a lot more welcoming to Jews than the Third Republic. And French identity would be the overarching identity that's more important than anything else. So they were not supportive of Youth Aliyah, for example, or any Zionist organization. So OSE, the Œuvre de Secours d'Enfants, which is until today operates orphanages in France and operated them before the war, shut down in 1943 and reopened after the war. They wanted those French children, Jewish children found in France, to stay in under OSE, rather than to go with Youth Aliyah. So they didn't always have the support of the local Jewish community.
And you allude to that in the book several times. So how did they resolve this? Were they just fighting with each other or sneaking behind each other's back, or how did it get resolved?
They tried to do it amicably, but the Jewish organizations based in France, other, not Youth Aliyah, for example, accepted the fact that the British that had blocked the entry of Jews after the war were issuing certain quotas of entry certificates. So they said, we will only go by those certificates, which of course was extremely limited. And when you talk about a Jewish child whose years have already been wasted waiting for parents, relatives to come, and now you're putting them in another waiting mode. Instead, Youth Aliyah said, we are bringing, and Haganah was very involved because of the clandestine operation of entering those, not just, it was an issue with taking children. They could not be too young through a clandestine operation. We can talk more about that. But they, through Youth Aliyah, they were going to come in no matter what, while the others had their ways of dealing with trying to appease the goyim. And as we know, appeasing the goyim never took us very far.
Mm-hmm. I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, write them on your cards, and Leah and some other people will come around and collect them. So let's switch a little bit. As I said, there's really three interweaving stories in this book, but let's talk about the Shareboard project. So explain to us what that is and how you got the idea to link these two operations together.
I have to give you a little naval warfare history of Israel.
We all need that.
I'll try to make it very brief. You all know the map of Israel, the very long shoreline until and then there is a port of Eilat. Let's not forget that. Until the early 1960s, the entire shoreline in Israel was protected from the air. Israel had a tiny, insignificant navy. When the Israeli Navy decided to start from scratch, and as in their naivete, they invented a new boat. There is something that never existed before. They started the model from a German one, but they found a shipyard in Cherbourg, France, which is the top of Normandy by the English Channel. And that's where they contracted to build the 12 boats. There were new kinds of boats that had not existed before. They were smaller, faster, made of steel instead of wood. By 1967, the Six-Day War, 5 of the 12 boats had been delivered. When a few months later, some things happened and de Gaulle announced an arms embargo, cynically against the Middle East, except that all of Israel's enemies, we know all the names all over, and they were being armed by Russia, while only Israel was being armed for 19 years now by France. All the tanks, the airplanes, and everything in between were French made. So now with the arms embargo, when all of the Israelis' enemies were licking their wounds after the huge loss in 1967, they were getting ready for the next round. Israel could not even get spare parts for its own tanks and airplanes, so they were getting out of commission, and a war was surely coming. Number 6 and number 7, as they came out of production, somehow managed to escape, but Pompidou came into power in 1968 and clamped down further on the arms embargo. And now it was very clear that as each boat was coming out, it could not leave. and the Navy would have none of it. Another reason was that the boats were supposedly for oil exploration, even though the Israeli Navy was stationed there. It was for oil exploration. That meant that the 7 boats now in Israel could not be armed. So they were not good for the Navy yet. And that's where we start our story. In 1968, as they begin to think and prepare what to do, as Israel's preparing for a war that is totally unprepared for, and how important those boats are. Again, I said, I can bore you to death about naval warfare, except that what I did, I took that very important story and I looked for the human drama. And how did I do it? I flew to Cherbourg, settled down, and decided that the story would find me. And that's what happened. By my 3rd day, Sharon Blumenthal showed up, that my 20-year-old protagonist, and from that point on, she carried the story with the human drama that we are discussing.
Wait, did she show up literally or just in your head?
Obviously, in my head.
No, but maybe she actually, and with a different name, actually knocked
You
on your
know,
hotel door.
When you get to know me, you know that I'm not totally unbalanced. But when it comes to fiction, stories are very much alive in my head. Now, who was Sharon Blumenthal? Those of you who have ever read my novel, Jerusalem Maiden, some of you have, or you have, but it was so long ago. She appears in the epilogue of that novel that had been published years before. And she's 20 years old in 1968, and she's in Paris. How perfect. So this was a complete coincidence. But I knew her past, I knew her family, I knew her story. And while I did not want to connect the 2 novels, there is that character that showed up. And those of you who've already read The Boy with a Star Tattoo, Savta, her grandmother, is the protagonist of Jerusalem Maiden, whom we meet in 1911 through 1924. So the stories are 44 years apart. What's interesting about Jerusalem Maiden, starting 1911, is that it's the same time that Henrietta Sold arrived, and she saw the 50% maternity death, 50% of children who did not live to 5 years old. That was the situation she met, and that's a situation described in my novel, Jerusalem Maiden. Again, unrelated, but Henrietta Sold has been kind of in the back of 2 of my books.
Very connected, very connected.
Not
Right,
intended to.
I'm going to take some questions from the audience here. Okay. And I just want to, she'll be mad at me that I do this, but I want a shout out to Leah Finkelstein. Leah, this One Book, One Hadassah would not happen with Leah. Leah is our senior editor and book editor, and she's the one who finds 50 books from which we choose one every other month. And she does all the details. So it really has a very important role. So shout out for Leah. You can yell at me later. So, both of these operations really involve considerable courage, persistence, and stealth. So maybe that's what kind of drew you to them in a way, because that's what I saw as a common element. So what did you learn generally about the people who are involved in these projects? And how did they reflect the early Halusim and early statespeople of this before and immediately after the development of the State of Israel?
If a story has people that face no challenges and no problems, and everything is copacetic, then you don't have a story. What interests me is the spirit, the way the human spirit rises over and above the forces that shape our lives. And in every moment, we are subject to a variety of situations. Could be the weather in Las Vegas, could be the political, psychological, religious, economic situations. All of those forces are running at the same time, at every moment. How does this one person gets over that, overcomes? That's where the human spirit that interests me, and that's why we have a story. And it's not just my story. It's probably most stories that you read are about some sort of a challenge, a change, something that made things happen. Otherwise, there's no story.
Yeah. Lots of drama for sure. Thank you. Thank you. So, unlike Sharon, Danny Yarden, who's another important character, has no interest in dwelling on the past, either his own or the Holocaust. So, particularly as it relates to the Holocaust, we know that was really true among Israelis in the early days and probably until fairly recently, right? They didn't really want to focus on their lives as victims, they wanted to project a new, strong image. Do you think that that perspective on the Holocaust has changed somewhat among Israelis, and particularly maybe post October 7th?
I would say that there's a big difference from someone who is a Holocaust survivor versus a third generation, or we call them, the children of them, we call them second generation, but they're really first generation. So it depends how you look at it. But then they are outsiders that have not been directly involved, or their families has not suffered directly from the Holocaust. My family is the largest Ashkenazi family in the world because we were in Israel, in Jerusalem. So yes, some people have moved to Europe and perished, but by and large, the entire Ashkenazi family stayed. So I don't even have direct Holocaust story. But the story of this character, the boy with a star tattoo, he's directly involved. And that meaning he knows his parents must have perished. And for him, all Holocaust stories are the same, rounding them up, sending them to concentration camps and then incinerators. He did not want to focus on that. He had to focus on the future of Israel and her survival. So I don't know that this has changed for the actual people who came out of the Holocaust. I know that many grandchildren of Holocaust survivors say, I wish I had talked to my grandfather or to my parents and found out more. They didn't want to tell. But sometimes I'm wondering, did actually those children wanted to hear? I know if I want to tell my daughters something that happened to me, they're not very patient to listen to my problems. So, and that's a problem, obviously minor. How much did they actually wanted to, the survivors want to tell, and how much did the others, their children, wanted to hear? I'm not sure. Now we are 80 years or so past the Holocaust, and we don't want it to be forgotten. So our perspective is to learn the lesson, and it's very different from being directly involved.
Yeah. So, this is a very difficult time for Jews in many fields, right? We know that educators, medical professionals, lots and lots of different fields. I know Hadassah has been very involved in being proactive and petitions in the educational field and the physician, the medical world. And it's been hard for Jewish authors and so-called Zionist authors, some of whom really are Zionists and some of them aren't. So Jewish and Israeli authors have been blacklisted for their so-called Zionist connections or even suspected of them. They've been canceled. Yet you have been one of the most outspoken people fighting back on this issue. So tell us a little bit about the direct experience you have had about review bombing. Explain what that is. What is really happening to Jewish authors throughout the industry these days?
My novel is definitely a Zionist, and I didn't hide that when actually my publisher is HarperCollins, but had submitted the book back a year before, and I took a sabbatical. So I didn't want to publish. Lo and behold, who knew that October 7th would happen? But by the time October 7th had arrived, my book in July and August and somewhat September was already sent and was in the hands of reviewers. The book came out and was supposed to come out at the end of January. They postponed it, January 30th. So it was already out in the, not just in the pipeline of HarperCollins, but in the hands of reviewers. So HarperCollins did not pull out. And that was not yet going to happen. But on December 17th, 6 weeks prior to the book's arrival, an influencer on TikTok from the UK posted 2 videos calling to attack me, to attack the book, and to make sure that it is, they call it bomb, tanked, would disappear before it comes out of the gate. Now, this is 6 weeks prior to the book's release. She's from the UK. How did she find out about me? I'm not sure. But she pointed to my bio in the video, to my bio on my website that shows that I had served in the IDF. Now, that's a bad one. And immediately that day, there was an attack on my Instagram, but I have not been an Instagram person yet. So I had an account, but once in a while I posted. So there was enough to attack there. And immediately it slipped onto goodreads.com. Unlike Amazon does not allow you to post a review until the book is actually out that day. And you have to be a known consumer. They have your credit card. You must have purchased something from Amazon. Goodreads.com is an open field. Anybody, anytime, from the moment the book has an ISBN number and the publishing date, it's listed, and anybody can post whatever they want to post. So on December 17th, the book was showered with 1-star reviews, other in text, calling me a genocidal cheerleader, and just ratings, which you can't even argue, because if somebody just gives it a 1 star. But obviously, these people could not have possibly have seen an advanced copy that reviewers get. All of this war was raging on Goodreads and on Instagram, and I was unaware of it for 2 weeks until I get a phone call from a friend, a voicemail. Talia, I'm so sorry about what you're going through. And so I have no idea. I call her back. She says, there's attacks. So I look on that. She says she saw it on Instagram. So I go on Instagram, I see it. The next day, I already, HarperCollins had a Zoom meeting. And I thought, okay, the issue is over. HarperCollins is going to force Goodreads to get rid of it. Now, this is around the week between Christmas and New Year. We still have a month before the book comes out. We can still do something for the damage. Well, I was surprised that HarperCollins has absolutely no say in the matter on Goodreads. And apparently no other publishers either, because there were some calls about boycotting Macmillan. So I'm still thinking this is going to go away, but apparently some people knew better. And bloggers, I don't know who they are, hundreds of Instagram readers and bloggers got together and wrote to one another and showered the book with 5-star reviews. Now,
It's probably
do
Hadassah,
the
right?
math to give the average between 1-star to 5-star. To get it over 4, there had to be at least 4 times number of 5 stars. All of them are empty, all of them by people who have not read the book. But at least that was a good beginning. The book did not tank. The problem was with the text reviews. I and others flagged, and you are invited to do that as well, flagged those text reviews that say this is a Zionist propaganda and so on. And Goodreads accepts the words Zionist propaganda. They do remove words that I say about genocide, when they say there's something about genocide, but they don't remove Nabka. Why didn't she write about the Nabka? Nabka is what the Arabs, the Palestinians call the founding of the state of Israel. Why didn't she write about Nabka? I didn't write about a lot of other things. This was not my book. But so all of these 1-stars are now have stayed until now. That's it. They're still there. So sometimes I still get an additional one. And now that is my little, I thought was my little battle to deal with. But apparently anti-Semitism has become big in the publishing industry. A woman wrote to me that she was finally got an agent to sign her, and the agent fired her because her book was Jewish themed, not about Israel, just about some Jewish life. And apparently the agents are the gatekeepers for the publishing world, because the major publishers are never touch a book unless it's officially agented. So they know how to read the signs if they don't accept or fire Jewish authors. We've seen now books being taken off the shelves if they deal with Israel, and in bookstores, virtually, literally. Authors' events being canceled, like in Georgetown University. They were concerned about the demonstrators. Unrelated to that, not because of that, but because of the nature of my book, I designed all of my book tour around Jewish organizations. Thank you, Hadassah. I have a lot of followers in Hadassah chapters and within the various regions. And also, we are people of the book. I still challenge anyone to find a YMCA that has the literary days that JCCs have. You simply cannot find them. So for me to develop my entire book tour around Jewish organizations, and because I spend my winter in Florida, the Jewish gated communities, the gated communities have a lot of Jewish population. So I happen to have a book tour that's not dependent upon libraries, and I never go to bookstores because I'd rather have a ticketed event with 200 people rather than go to a bookstore and not be sure if 2 people show up. So I have that privilege that many authors don't. So I bring some authors behind me, meaning I recommend them for next year to those organizations. But bookstores have now are intimidated. They don't want anybody with a loudspeaker outside. I did do just last month, the end of June, 2 libraries in Long Island, Glen Cove and Great Neck. I figured Glen Cove, those of you who know Long Island, is far enough north that, I'm sorry, before then I spoke with the FBI that gave me some tips what to do. So that was far enough. In Great Neck, I know that they have a very strong private police. So I told the librarian, please make sure the police is there. And those are the only 2 out of 50 events that I happen to have. But my battles went now into the Authors Guild. The Authors Guild represents about 15,000 authors. Now, Jews are only 2.5% of the population. I dare say that we are probably tenfold more in our representation among writers. I expected that the Authors Guild would come up with, by that time, it was written about me. I became the poster girl. So an article in the New York Post opened with author Talia Carner. The JTA article opened with Talia Carner. So, I became it's not good publicity, right? But the Authors Guild, I tried to post a link to one of those articles, and not only deleted it, they gave a strike against me. Okay? I was so stunned that at first I couldn't begin to believe what was going on. Eventually, some other Jewish supporters of me, and they had their post struck, talked about it. I wrote a letter to the Authors Guild demanding that they issue a statement against anti-Semitism. I made sure that the letter went public, not stay internal. So it was picked by the San Diego Jewish News and some other places. And it took them 9 days, and they came out with a statement they stand very strongly against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. So I'm still in battle with them. As of 30 hours ago, I got another strike against me because of something I posted. I posted something about their behavior. So yeah. So it's happening. But the thing about me in this is that I seem to be a fighter, but there's a reason why I'm a writer and I don't work in the corporate world anymore. It's because I really don't like to fight with people on one-to-one. And when I was in the corporate world and I was the publisher of Savvy Woman magazine, I had to spend all my days telling mediocre people how wonderful they were. And I'm really not made for it. So I don't like this kind of tension that was thrown into my life, first by the outside anti-Semitism, and now by my own organization that refuses to offer authors the protection they need. And the reason I'm asking it is because I'm the one Jewish author that can prove a concerted campaign as it started on December 17th on TikTok with videos. The others, if it's Lisa Barr, if it's Gabrielle Zevin, they get 1 stars, of course, Noah Tishby, but there are, and some of them, they are really still very small, and it doesn't show one concerted campaign. So for me to lead that fight, it's because if I win somehow, I can also help those other authors.
You know what? I'm so glad that you mentioned that because I think it's so important. And we're going to end in a minute or two because I'm sure you're all aware also of this Google document that came out about in May listing, the title was all lowercase, not even grammatically correct. Who's your, is your fave author a Zionist? And Talia had the privilege of being on that. And Gabrielle Zevin, who was also a one-book author, Lisa Barr, who was also a one-book author,
But
Elisa,
also non-Jewish
and some
authors.
non-Jewish authors. And again, it was simply
Kristen Hamill,
right.
she once wrote, thanked an Israeli medical team that went to help and after a natural disaster. Now she's a Zionist.
Right, exactly.
I mean, they had
Right,
that
right.
list is
And it was
crazy.
really, it was an effort to, have people boycott these books. It was eventually taken down because it violated the terms of Google, but not before it was about 1 million views. And it is really interesting because some authors are out fighting like you. Others are trying to hide because they don't feel it's good for their business. And I'm sure you're having all kinds of conversation with these other authors. And again, our goal is to really promote these authors, not just because they're Jewish and Zionist, because they're writing really great books like you,
Yeah.
and that people should be reading those books. So, really kol hakavod for the work that you're doing. I'm going to end on just one process. We had some good questions from the audience, some of which I gave already. Somebody wants to know, how long does it take to write a book?
About 5 years. I could get my PhD at that time. But yeah, it takes me years. I know some authors come up every year with a new book, and there's a November novel writing month. People are supposed to write a novel in 1 month. I really don't know how they do it. I'm not that kind of a writer. I just listened to an interview with Joyce Maynard. She said she's really published like 20 books, and she said, I took 2 months to hide in my house in Guatemala to write this book. Well, I'm sorry. It takes me 4 or 5 years.
Well,
But
we'll look forward to the next one. You want to give us any hint about what that's
no,
about?
I
No
can't.
hint.
I'm sorry.
Come on.
I
give us a
find
scoop.
I find that if I say something about a book when it's so raw, I mean they're still in the idea and just the beginning, uh, I then when I want to change something, I say, oh, but I said that it's like this or that, as if I owe this one person I already said something, and I find that it puts as some sort of stupid little editor parrot here on my shoulder tells me you can't change. You already said that. So I prefer to wait, if you don't mind.
Okay, that's okay. Well,
And what if I abort that book?
right, right. What's your last word to this audience? What's the takeaway from your book that you want to bring to us?
What's the takeaway? Jewish identity. The book ends, it's divided into 3 uneven parts. The last part is called belonging. And actually I want to say it starts with a quote from Somerset Maugham, who never thought that this Jewish girl was going to use it. Some men are born out of their due place. Accident has cast them amid certain surroundings, but they have always a nostalgia for a home they know not. A home they know not. Isn't that next year in Jerusalem? How many generations of bar mitzvahs have gone over 2,000 years saying next year in Jerusalem? That nostalgia, that sense of belonging is the centrality, whatever it is, whatever is Jewish identity. In this book, it does deal with a question. Which I came through while I was writing it, because I come from a very secular family. I'd never been to a synagogue in my life until my 20s when I came to the United States, because they were all Orthodox, and what's the point of sitting there in the back and the men were mumbling someplace. My parents played canasta on Yom Kippur. But we were through and through Jewish. There was never a question. My mother was a Haganah commander. I mean, you could never question our Jewish identity. But I had a conversation with a non-Jewish author, and she said to me, we were nibbling on shrimp. She says, how can you be Jewish if you're not eating kosher? It's nothing to do with that. So the question of what does it mean to be Jewish came in my book time and again in various versions. Is it if your mother is Jewish, or if you're an Israeli and you devote to Israel? So those are the questions. But the belonging became so important. The book came out obviously after October 7th. And I remember 2 days after, this sense of shock. We are still in mourning, but the sense of shock. And I was in a supermarket and my eyes caught the eyes of another shopper. And in that moment, we knew that we were united in something that was not visible to the rest of the world. That sense of belonging, that unfortunately it's national pain, is there. And you can call us ethnic, you can call us whatever is our definition, we belong. And the centrality of Israel is something that we almost forgot. Without Israel, the Jews would be the Kurds and the Romani of the world, ridiculed, disrespected, exploited, people with no land. Israel made us walk tall, and we forgot about it. Our generation of younger people began to forget. And here we are. Unfortunately, it's the tragedy that brought many of us back together.
Well, that's a good note to end on. I want to now call up to close the program Ellen Hershkin. I think she needs no introduction. Former National Hadassah president and now the chair of Hadassah Magazine. And while she's coming up, I want to thank all the technical crew and the engagement division and marketing that also contribute to these events.
Thank you, Lisa and Talia, for a most informative, entertaining, and thought-provoking session. Thank you to you, our in-person audience, and to those of you who have chosen to join us via Zoom. Hundreds of our loyal One Book, One Hadassah participants, as well as new viewers. A long-standing friend of Hadassah, Talia was a guest author at many of our region events and for the Hadassah Brandeis Institute as well, where she continues to serve on the board. It was my privilege to introduce her to Hadassah audiences more than 10 years ago when we brought forth her book, the Jerusalem Maiden. One of the references in the book, The Boy with the Star Tattoo, is the old adage, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I'm referring to one of the seemingly minor characters in the book, but nonetheless not less significant. Rivka, the 16-year-old girl Uzi rescued, who suffered the apparently acceptable tolerance of rape during and post-wartime. How timely her lack of dignity was as we read the story that took place more than 80 years ago and brought us to today, or should I say October 7th, 2023, as we remember those who were murdered, kidnapped, tortured, and or raped. Unacceptable. The Me Too movement that brought down those who demanded sexual favors in turn for personal advancement in a wide variety of industries shows itself as Me Too, unless you're a Jew. Hadassah launched our End the Silence global campaign to bring awareness to the weaponization of sexual violence in times of war. Many of us have painted a nail yellow, So people will ask us, why is your nail yellow? The answer is to show our solidarity with those who have been victimized and to take an active role in standing up and speaking out. We have called on the United Nations to pursue an unbiased investigation into these crimes and seek justice for the injured parties in Israel and beyond. Sharon, or as I read in the book, Sharon, must force herself to unknow what is already lodged in her brain. Can you ever unknow or unsee? Several of us bore witness to the atrocities of October 7th as we participated in Hadassah's solidarity missions. The next one is September 2nd through 9th. I urge you to take advantage of the opportunity. What we saw will stay with us forever. Through the character of Danny, we see someone whose Jewish identity is imbued with his Zionist vision. He has dedicated his life to the security of Israel, the very survival of the Jews to whom he belongs. On a personal note, I was touched by Talia's inclusion of the Jewish Brigade of the British Army. My grandfather's brother, my great uncle Al, fought in the Jewish Brigade. He too dedicated his life to the survival of the Jews to whom he belonged. These words, and we did not speak before today, these words summarize the entire book for me. I quote, "It all comes down to belonging to something larger than herself. For some people, it is belonging to a shared faith. For others, a shared ideology. For some, it is a matter of love. For others, a matter of family. But her arc of belonging, and Danny's, comes from their national spirit, one defined not by the Holocaust, by the common destiny of connecting with the past, present, and future of the Jewish people. Belonging to Israel is central to their identity." Talia, I really appreciated the sentence. Leadership means persuasion without using physical force. Each of us has the ability to become a leader, and those of us who already are, we can gain additional skills to further enhance our roles. The takeaways from this national conference will be the tools, the stories, the information to do just that. Persuade others as to why Hadassah, the Women's Zionist Organization of America, should be their organization of choice and the recipient of their volunteer time and philanthropic focus, while giving them a true sense of belonging to each other, the Jewish people, and our beloved Israel. Our next One Book, One Hadassah program will be held virtually only on Thursday, August 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time with Joan Ligant, author of Displaced Persons. Joan's book is an exquisitely written collection of short stories. Half are set in Israel, half are set in the United States, all of which explore themes of transition and wandering, joy and homecoming. A link to register is in the chat box for those of you on Zoom. For everyone else, look out for registration details in our H News and Hadassah magazine newsletters. And now for a few housekeeping announcements. For those of you who chose as your incentive the special meet and greet with Talia, please go to Melrose 1-2 immediately following this program. For everyone else, Talia will be available to sign books tomorrow morning from 8 to 8:30 at breakfast in Celebrity 4. Breakfast will be a buffet and opens at 7:30. She will also have book plates for those who forgot their books, or who have yet to buy. National board members, please, you will meet at 5:15. You met already, but get over there. Following this event for a brief meeting in Celebrity 6-8. At 5:30, we invite the intergenerational families in attendance for a group photo at the registration desk. Checkout tomorrow is 11 a.m. You may store bags with the bellman in the lobby. We have a lot of security here, and we cannot allow any unattended bags in the conference area. Now, there's been a little bit of confusion. Those of you who are going to the Mob Museum this evening, the buses are leaving at 6:30. Don't come down at 6:30. Come down early enough so that you can get on a bus that will be leaving at 6:30. And you must bring your badges with you for security. And on that note, I thank you all again. This session is officially closed.